Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dengan menyebut nama Allah yang Maha Pemurah lagi Maha Penyayang.
Comparison between the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court as part of the actors of judicial power in Indonesia.
Presented by Dwi Handoko.
Preliminary. According to the 1945 Constitution of the State of the Republic of Indonesia year 1945, judicial power is regulated in Chapter 9. The chapter consists of 5 articles, namely Article 24, Article 24A, Article 24B, Article 24C, and Article 25. Below is given a classification of the provisions of those articles to understand the scope of judicial power in Indonesia. General Provisions. Article 24. Number 1. Judicial power shall constitute an independent power to hold a judicature for law reinforcement and justice. Number 2. Judicial power shall be made by a Supreme Court and judicial bodies thereunder within a general judicature, religious court, military court, state administration court, and by a constitutional court. Number 3. Other bodies of which the functions relate to judicial power shall be stipulated by virtue of law. The Supreme Court. Article 24A. Number 1. The Supreme Court shall be competent to hear at cassation instance, test the legislation under the law against the law, and have other competences conferred upon by the law. Number 2. Justices of the Supreme Court shall have non-disgraceful, fair, professional integrity and personality and be experienced in the field of law. Number 3. The prospective justices of the Supreme Court shall be recommended by the Judicial Commission to the House of People's Representative for approval and further stipulated as Justice of the Supreme Court by the President. Number 4. Chief Judge and Deputy Chief Judge of the Supreme Court shall be elected from and by the Justices of the Supreme Court. Number 5. Composition, position, membership, and law of procedure of the Supreme Court and judicial bodies thereunder shall be stipulated by virtue of law. The Independent Judicial Commission. Article 24b. Number 1. The Independent Judicial Commission shall be competent to recommend the appointment of justices of the Supreme Court and have other competences in the framework of maintaining and upholding the honor, dignity, and behavior of the judges. Number 2. Members of Judicial Commission shall have knowledge and experience in the field of law, non-disgraceful integrity and personality. Number 3. Members of Judicial Commission shall be appointed and dismissed by the President with the approval from the House of People's Representative. Number 4. Composition, position, and membership of Judicial Commission shall be stipulated by virtue of law. The Constitutional Court. Article 24c. Number 1. The Constitutional Court shall be competent to hear at the first and final instances, where the judgment shall be final in nature, to test the law against the Constitution, judge dispute of competence of state institution of which the competence is conferred upon by the Constitution, judge dissolution of a political party, and judge a dispute on general election results. Number 2. The Constitutional Court shall pass a judgment on opinions of the House of People's Representative on alleged violation committed by the President and/or Vice President pursuant to the Constitution. Number 3. The Constitutional Court shall have 9 members of constitutional judges stipulated by the President. The members are proposed by the Supreme Court, 3 members by the House of People's Representative, and 3 members by the President. Number 4. Chief Judge and Deputy Chief Judge of Constitutional Court shall be elected by and from constitutional judges. Number 5. Constitutional judges shall have non-disgraceful, fair, professional integrity and personality, be statesmen mastering constitution and state administration, and not double as state officials. Number 6. Appointment and dismissal of constitutional judges, live procedure, and any other provisions on constitutional court shall be stipulated by virtue of law. Terms of appointment and dismissal of judges, Article 25. The requirements of becoming and being dismissed as judge shall be stipulated by virtue of law. Mark 3 of stars as described above means the third alteration or amendment of the 1945 Constitution of the State of the Republic of Indonesia year 1945, conducted by the People's Deliberative Assembly of the Republic of Indonesia. From the above description, it is known that the scope of the judicial power, according to the Constitution in Indonesia, is the Supreme Court, and the lower courts within the General Court, the jurisdiction of the judiciary, the military court environment, the administrative court of the state, the constitutional court, other bodies whose functions relate to judicial powers, and the Independent Judicial Commission. It should be emphasized that the Independent Judicial Commission is included within the scope of the judicial authority, but the Independent Judicial Commission is not the perpetrator or actors of the judicial power. Actors of judicial power in Indonesia-based constitution. Supreme Court and judicial bodies thereunder. Supreme Court, Article 24 Clause 2 and Article 24a. Constitutional Court, Article 24 Clause 2 and Article 24c. The Independent Judicial Commission, Article 24b. Other bodies of which the functions relate to judicial power, Article 24 Clause 3. Judicial bodies thereunder. Supreme Court, General Judicature, Religious Court, Military Court, State Administration Court. Other bodies of which the functions relate to judicial power: investigation, prosecution, execution, legal aid, dispute resolution outside the court. Supreme Court, judicial bodies thereunder. Supreme Court and Constitutional Court is the actors of judicial power in Indonesia. The Independent Judicial Commission, and other bodies of which the functions relate to judicial power, is not the actors of judicial power in Indonesia. This study is based on the curiosity to reveal the scope and existence of the judicial power in Indonesia, the scope and existence of the two state institutions in the field of judicial power, namely the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. Therefore, this study can be done to see and compare it between the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. The completeness of this study of science, especially legal science, is the understanding and contemplation of the space and existence of the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court as a home for justice seekers in Indonesia to materialize what the law seeks to achieve. Similarity authority between the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court both have the authority of the first and final court decision. In general, the decision of the Constitutional Court is the first and last. According to
Dwi Handoko,
against the verdict imposed by the Constitutional Court, everything is final and binding. Meanwhile, against the verdict imposed by the Supreme Court, there is a final and binding, and there are also decisions that, not final, but already binding. An example of a final and binding decision by the Supreme Court is a decision in a review case, while the example of the verdict imposed by the Supreme Court, which is not final yet binding, is in the case of cassation. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court both involve the Judicial Commission in the appointment of supreme judges and constitutional justices. In relation to improvements between law enforcement by the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court with other bodies whose functions relate to the judicial powers, the following comparison is made. Equalization. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court both provide and uphold the human rights body, namely the granting of access to people who cannot afford legal aid recipients to be able to hold a law in the Supreme Court and in the Constitutional Court. From the above description, the authors recommend to the House of People's Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to form law about judicial power in Indonesia into a special book of constitution or law or codified. This is, according to the author, is very important because with the compilation of a special book containing the judicial power will facilitate the seeker of justice in terms of finding the legal basis as one means of defending himself in the trial. In addition, with the separation of rules on the actors of judicial authorities, it would be difficult for students to understand that the perpetrators of judicial powers in Indonesia are in fact controlled by many legal institutions, both in the form of general justice and special courts. The difference of authority between the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court differ in terms of the supervisory patterns of Supreme Court justices and constitutional justices. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court differ in terms of final and binding court rulings. The decision of the Supreme Court in general is not the first and last because there is a final and binding court ruling. And there are also decisions that are not final yet binding. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court differ in dismissal of Supreme Court justices and constitutional judges involving the Judicial Commission. The Supreme Court in a criminal case shall base its analysis of the judicial process which has been conducted, in example starting from investigation, prosecution, up to the judgment of the decision, either at the first level and/or an equivalent court, where the Constitutional Court has no authority in enforcing the criminal law. Will the decision of the Constitutional Court related to decriminalization give a significant influence in criminal law enforcement? Furthermore, there is a difference of transparency in the examination of judicial review cases in the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. In the examination of judicial review of the law against the 1945 Constitution of the State of the Republic of Indonesia year 1945. In the Constitutional Court, starting from preliminary examination until the read or declaration of the decision is made public. This is certainly different from the examination of judicial review cases of laws under the law in the Supreme Court. Thank you.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Segala puji bagi Allah, Tuhan seluruh alam.